Welcome everybody. Today's webinar is on strategies to drive adoption in your organization, and specific of course to SharePoint adoption in your organization. It's presented and sponsored by SharePointvideos.com. Now the way we're going to go is we'll quickly go ahead and do the introduction of the panelists and myself and the host, and then we'll jump into the questions that we have prepared. But please put your questions in the question panel as well. That's what we are really interested in, to understand and hear what you have to say, and then hopefully focus on that and hopefully give you some guidance to have this time that you're spending with us be worth it. So first we have Susan Handley, and the Twitter handle right after that. Speaker and writer on all things SharePoint adoption and governance, recognized expert, and like all of us actually, all of us including Susan do a lot of presentations at conferences, and I've seen Susan speak quite a bit as well. Great expert in all things, like I said, governance and SharePoint adoption. Ruben Gatz is a director of collaboration at Avanade. Ruben, as it says, has spent the last 9 years delivering award-winning SharePoint solutions to a wide range of clients. Welcome. We also have Michael Pisarek. Michael is an owner at Dynamic Owl Consulting, also runs a website, SharePointHQ.com. And Michael aspires to fundamentally change the way SharePoint is implemented around the world. Awesome. And lastly, you got me. This is Asif Rahmani, and I'm an author, speaker, and trainer, very much focused on making SharePoint successful in organizations with education, with support, so training, consulting, and guidance. All right, and that's it for introductions. Let's move on. Regarding GoToWebinar, which is what we are using right now, please go to the questions panel. I already see there's one question out there by Jeff. Thanks, Jeff. Please go to the question panel, make use of it, put your questions out there. I'll be taking the questions, and then I'm going to go ahead and take your question, put it up, well, not with attributes, don't worry, I'm not going to use your name or anything, but the best questions that I see out there, I'm going to go ahead and put it up on the slide, and then we'll go ahead and focus on that question and then collaborate and strategize around that. So your best way to communicate with us is the questions panel, so please use it. Okay, so I'm going to throw this first question that we have prepared already. First one, why does SharePoint adoption matter and who should care? And for this one, Michael, why don't you go ahead and attack that first? What do you have to say about this?
Sure, thanks Asif. So I know that Susan and I and some of the panelists are actually discussing this before the webinar started, and I think Susan and I are on the same opinion. Adoption shouldn't be that primary metric that you're kind of chasing, right? I think adoption is a result of having a solution that ultimately provides value to end users. However, adoption is one of those things where, if the solution is providing benefits to your organization, then more people are going to be are obviously going to be using a solution that provides value. What I have seen in some organizations is that they're so busy and focused chasing this adoption metric that they're not actually looking to see if, well, just because users are using whatever they built within SharePoint, is it actually providing them the business benefits that you're kind of after. And a typical one that we see is how many hits does the intranet homepage get, right? And what people typically do is they measure their rate of SharePoint adoption by saying, well, we built this intranet, we spent a whole bunch of money on it, and of course, people must actually love it because we're getting 500,000 hits per year or a million hits per year. Hence, SharePoint must be doing well and has been adopted within the organization. What they've failed to do, though, is go and actually engage and ask those end users, are you actually really using the intranet to kind of look at content, or, is it because the IT guys have just set basically the default homepage for everyone to the intranet, so you're kind of getting a false metric. SharePoint adoption is super important, but what I think is more important, and what I'd rather see organizations actually look for when using the platform, is providing a solution that ultimately provides value and benefits to the end users. And if that does happen, that you'll find that adoption is just going to be a byproduct of that.
Great, thank you, Michael. Reuven, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I agree with what Michael is saying. It's true that your main driver needs to be business value, but I think that while he's seen examples of people basically chasing this adoption metric, we also see examples of people who forget a key risk factor. You know, when you're planning a project, you go through your various risk factors. What if the servers go down? What's our disaster recovery? You know, what are risks that you know, people don't create content in a timely manner, or whatever all the risks are that you put together. But one of the key risks that can get forgotten is, what is the risk of no one actually using this, what we've built? And the risk is that you've got an investment with no return. You know, your ROI is very poor. So I think it's really, really important to think about adoption early on for a few reasons. One is to think about how you're going to measure it. Michael's right. If you say what's our hits on our homepage, and yet the default that everyone starts up their browser and gets that site, that's obviously not a metric that's going to provide real value. So I think there needs to be some deeper thinking about adoption, and I think that the people who care are pretty broad, but some of the key people who care are the ones who are putting the money in investing in the solution to say that the business value that we're providing is actually being provided, that people are getting it, and that people are getting value out of what we've done.
So true. Really good points. Susan, would you like to go next?
Sure. So obviously they're both right. But even the challenge with SharePoint solutions in particular is that even if you have a solution that meets all of what users want, has been designed effectively to solve a business problem, what makes SharePoint solutions unique for all of us is that in fact there's almost always an alternative way of accomplishing the same outcome. And so we now have to deal with another thing that's kind of different from your typical general ledger or accounts payable system. With SharePoint solutions, we also have to recognize that people are going to have to change in order to get the most value from the solutions that we're building. And so now we really need to think about adoption because we're dealing with people. And for the most part, there's this great quote about change that I totally love that somebody said, change is good, you go first. And so what we now need to think about as we think about adoption early and we build these great solutions is how to make people want to go first.
I love that quote. Change is good. You go first. You know, you guys have made some awesome points, and I knew this was going to happen if I go last and talk about some of the things. All the good points will already be taken. So I agree with all of you. I think these are awesome points. I'm going to throw out a example in there as well. Something that actually happened with a consulting firm that I was working with way back in 2004. It was SharePoint 2003 that we implemented for a university. I don't want to mention which university exactly, but pretty big one. And they loved it. They customized it. They made it so pretty themselves, and we helped out. And the end product looked beautiful. However, a few months later, they went ahead and looked at what the top search is, and if the search is being, if people are actually finding what they're looking for. And the topmost search, believe it or not, was something that could not be found anywhere on the new quote-unquote intranet, which was, of course, implemented with SharePoint. You guys want to guess what it is? Reuven, Michael, Susan? What do you think? What were they searching for?
Was it the lunch menu? Well, I've either seen it's the lunch menu or another client, and I swear this is true, their top search term was Google.
Oh, my God. So, Michael, you got it on the first try, actually. It was the cafeteria menu because it was university, and people wanted to know what was the cafeteria menu, right? And they could find it easily on the old intranet, but the new, beautiful-looking, pretty intranet, they could not find it anywhere. So if you're not going to provide the actual information they're looking for, adoption will not happen, guaranteed, obviously. It doesn't matter how pretty it looks, right? Information is key. So that's just my contribution to throw in there, that you know what, you got to design it for the users. You cannot design it for the IT. You cannot design it for the administrators. It's got to be for the people who are actually using it. And information that you provide, of course, matters big time. So great. Here's another one. So the next question here, how can we truly engage the SharePoint end users? Reuven, in this case, would you like to go first?
Sure. I'm going to take a slightly different tack on this one based on my experience. And trying to engage someone after the fact is tricky and requires some creative ideas, and I think you're going to hear a few from Sue and Michael. But I've found that the best way to engage at least a key subset is by involving them very early. I run discovery workshops, sometimes many of them, more than 20 of them, with various groups and various roles across the organization. And I listen to what their issues are. I don't tell them about features of SharePoint. I listen to what their issues are. And as we work together and start understanding what problems they're having and how technology thwarts them, I start to see an emerging pattern. And after I've done 3 or 4 of these workshops, I've basically heard everything that I need to know. But you know what? I still conduct the remaining workshops, not necessarily because of the information I get out of it, although I do get further tidbits, but because the people love to be listened to, love to be heard, and then I follow up with them later on. I don't demo SharePoint early, but I follow up with them later with a day in the life of what their life could look like using their documents and their terminology. And I let them know that we're not going to solve all their problems, but that we've heard them and prioritized them, and some of them are going to be dealt with. These people become true champions. And they want to adopt this new system. They feel they've been involved, and they help with others getting involved as well.
That's great. Thank you, Reuven. Sue?
Well, I think Reuven's exactly right, and I'll just give you an example of why I do this. So I have the exact same scenario. You always want to engage as many people as you can, and I always, when I'm trying to think about engagement, I think about why this is really, really important. And I keep coming back to that Windows 7 commercial, because at the end of the day, you want every single person in the organization that you've touched to be able to say, oh, that was my idea. And I think ultimately that's what we're trying to do when we achieve engagement. Engage people early so they can see, so that we can design a solution in which they can see themselves, and then give them that opportunity so that they can see their idea in the solution. So obviously you're not going to be able to talk to everybody in the organization, but Reuven's right, you're going to gather a whole bunch of evangelists by engaging them early. After the fact, then, you have to think about how to create interest in your new solution or engage people, because you're going to solve a problem that is meaningful to them. And so my other thing I say all the time is everyone in the organization is listening to the same radio station, WIIFM. What's in it for me? So how is your solution going to make an impact on my life, something that's important to me? And if you can, you're basically going to describe the solution in different ways based on the different kinds of people, roles, and functions and all that you're dealing with in the organization.
Excellent points. Thank you, Sue. Michael?
Yeah, I totally agree. Actually, it's getting people involved in the creation of the solution early. Educating them on the benefits as well. One thing that we've found, we do a lot of change management work as part of my company. One thing that we found, particularly from an engagement perspective, is that because SharePoint is fairly invasive, it's really changing the way that people work. One thing that we try to communicate to them from a change management perspective to get over that initial kind of engagement or tipping point is that there's going to be some short-term pain for some long-term gain. And what we find is, other consulting companies or other people, when they roll out something like SharePoint, they actually tell their users from day one, you guys are going to be, this is going to be easy, you're not going to need much training, all of those sorts of things. What we tend to find is that end users really understand much better and are engaged a lot more. If you say to them, listen, we're going to change the way you work. So because of that, you're going to have to unlearn things that you've been doing for a fairly long time. So you've been working with emails and file shares for 30 years. Now to use this new system called SharePoint or whatever you choose to call it, you're going to have to kind of adapt the way that you work. So there's going to be a little bit of a dip in productivity, but then 2 weeks, maybe a month later, you're going to start to see all of these new benefits. So that's one way that we've found to engage, particularly users which are a little bit apprehensive when the platform rolls out, because it's really easy for them to actually say, well, this is just way too hard, and I'm not going to bother changing. So that's one of the things. I think Susan and Ruben are totally right. And I know Paul Conzi has a really great quote saying that people don't want to be planned at, they want to be planned with. And I think if you get those people involved early, one of the great things from an engagement perspective is that you've got a group of SharePoint power users, you've got a group of SharePoint champions ready to go when your solution is created, and the best people to engage end users are the end users.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with all you guys, actually, that you have to have those evangelists. You have to have those people on your side, who are, of course, part of the end-user community, for them to spread the word, for them to have the other end users understand why it is important to them. Why should they care? Why is it going to make their life easier rather than harder, rather than having to learn something new? How is it going to help them with their current limitations and business processes? So,
and to overcome a great phrase that I heard someone at a customer use, you need advocates to overcome your badvocates.
That's awesome. Never heard that one before.
those who are against you.
Wow. Good thoughts. All right, great. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one. All right, so here it is. Should be showing up now. Can the same strategies work in every environment? So, horizontally, can something that works in, for example, a law firm, can it work in a hospital or accounting or some other verticals? Michael, do you want to go? Who went last time first? I forget. Sorry. Oh, I think Susan, it's your turn to go first.
Sure, I'll go first.
All right.
Yeah, this is a loaded question. Of course, the answer is no. You always have to pay attention to the culture of your organization and the specifics of your solution. Now, that doesn't mean you can't reuse ideas from other people. It just means that you have to pay attention to whether or not a particular strategy is appropriate. I can tell you there is one universal strategy that will work in a law firm or in an accounting firm or in a hospital or in an educational institution. And that is that when you think about helping people learn about your new solution, your goal isn't necessarily to train them in every single feature and every single function. What your job is to make them comfortable. And the focus of your training should be about making people comfortable. And that is a strategy that works in any organization.
And I think that that couples in with what we discussed previously as well, which is listening to people and responding to their needs is one that works across the board. So I see that as well.
Oh, there is one other thing, though. Actually, in terms of an adoption strategy, food works everywhere. So you can usually get people into a room if you give them food.
But I know, Sue, I know that you've had some really successful, or seen at some of your clients, some really successful specific engagement strategies that have worked really well. They don't all necessarily would work across every environment, but in the particular environments where you saw them, they worked really well. The naming of the way they named it, or the contest they ran for that, and that type of thing, or the way they identified people.
Well, again, so one way to engage people, you're right, is sort of to engage people around the name. Although it's really interesting, the organizations that I've seen that have the most successful naming strategies have not done them via what many people want to do, which is to run a contest to create the name. So engaging people to make sure that the name works is great, that it's relevant, it sends the right message, but may not be. But having a contest per se isn't going to work in every organization. I do think, though, in terms of an ongoing engagement strategy, that doing things on a regular basis, whatever they are, to introduce new concepts, to make people more comfortable with things like setting up their profile or whatever is important in your organization, those kind of things are pretty universal.
Sure. Michael, you want to throw something in there too?
Yeah, I think there's one more universal apart from the food trick, which, listen, lunch and learns are the best ROI from an engagement perspective and a user adoption perspective you can get. You know, you ask people to come to a SharePoint workshop, you know, without any food, no one comes. You offer them pizza, all of a sudden you've got, you know, 300 people cramming to get into the door. I think the other thing from an engagement perspective that we've found that works really well is if the top level executives get involved as well. And it's pretty amazing the difference that can make. And I'll give you an example. We were working with a client and they were trying to use some of the social features to basically allow each other to kind of communicate and collaborate a little bit easier. You know, and it was going, and in terms of that, they were trying to use some of the new features from SharePoint 2013, but also they were trying to get, you know, some of their project teams to actually do blogs as well, and the blogs were rolled up onto the homepage. It was going relatively well, right? And then all of a sudden we saw this spike, and we're wondering, like, what happened here? What happened is that the CEO started to get involved, right? He started to do blog posts. He started to comment on people's posts as well. And that fundamentally changes the way that people view any initiative and can view SharePoint as well. You know, having that executive support is super, super important, not just from the project level, but I think also from the engagement level as well. And, you know, we've seen that time and time again. One post, one comment, one you know, story submitted from someone like the CEO or the CIO almost gives the rest of the organization permission and actually tells them, you know, this is something serious that we want to do, and really gets people on board as well. I wish the same strategies worked in every environment, because then I could just have a book and kind of look and tick off this, and this. But I think, like everyone else has said, it really depends on the culture of your organization. Everything's a little bit, you know, every organization's a little bit different and a little bit quirky. But I think food and getting the execs or the leaders of the organization involved seems to work pretty much every time.
Great. Very good thought. Yeah, exactly.
Can I have one more example, because what Michael said just triggered something for me. So I had a client once where one of their objectives was to stop that pervasive disease that exists in most organizations, versionitis. And one of the symptoms was that they were constantly emailing documents around. So as part of the rollout of the new collaboration solution, they wanted to encourage people to stop sending email attachments and send links to the documents in place. And one of the things they did was they engaged an executive who basically committed to not replying to any internal email message that had an attachment. And he would basically, for about 3 weeks, replied back, "Thank you very much, really appreciate that you're sending me this email, but I don't read attachments. I'll only look at it if you send me a link. So send me your email again and with a link instead of an attachment, and I'll get on it as soon as I can," or something to that effect.
This is Ruben. I have a real-life story as well that taught me a lesson early on in my career. We would have strategy meetings every Monday morning. This wasn't a large company, and the CEO had a terminal computer projecting on the screen, and he asked me how a particular document was coming along, and I said, almost done. He said, "Where can I find it in SharePoint?" And I said, "Oh, it's on my desktop right now. I'll upload it right after the meeting." He said, "No, we'll wait." And the meeting stopped while I ran down the hall to my office and uploaded the document so that he could find it in SharePoint. And the message was driven home to me and to everyone else in that meeting that this is the place where we find our documents. And so that kind of executive modeling of behavior, or that executive drive, can really make a big difference.
Excellent. Yeah, definitely. The executive buy-in, the food, just like you guys mentioned, those are pretty big in most companies. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next question, guys. We do have a lot of good stuff coming in, and I'll be switching back and forth from the stuff that we have prepared and the stuff that's coming in. So here is the next one. It should start showing up on your screen in just a second. How do we prepare the people responsible for supporting SharePoint? So of course SharePoint help desk or the SharePoint guy or the SharePoint girl, basically an organization that is usually pretty bogged down with a lot of stuff coming in their way. What is the best way to support those folks? Michael, I think it's your turn to go first if you're okay with that.
Sure. So this is one that's always interesting. So if you take it from that traditional help desk perspective, when people basically, they have a problem and they call level 1 support, which is the help desk. I've seen kind of two approaches, and the first approach is basically having a team of SharePoint experts that know a little bit around the entire platform, basically helping and enabling users. So that's one approach. The second approach that I think works better, and it actually is something that we've talked about earlier, is being able to create power users or site admins that have been intricately involved in the creation of the solution of those sites, and then having them actually acting as those as the SharePoint experts. Because frequently what we find when people ask for help with SharePoint, they're almost asking two different questions. One of those questions is more about the mechanics of, how do I do this within SharePoint? So how do I upload a document? How do I connect my calendar to Outlook? It's more of a functional thing, which is kind of solution agnostic. Most of the time when you're creating business solutions, people are actually asking more kind of business-focused questions. So it's not how do I upload a document, it's how do I upload a contract, where should it go, and what type of metadata should I attach to that as well. And by having those kind of site champions and experts, not only can they answer those kind of mechanical questions, but they can also answer those really contextual questions around the business process. So that's one of the things that we've seen work really well. For traditional help desk kind of people, SharePoint does present some challenges because SharePoint's a big enterprise platform with a lot of moving bits, and having one person who knows the answer to every single question just isn't going to happen. But even simple questions can be pretty complex. So typical question, a user calls the help desk and says, I can't log in. Now there's any number of things that could be causing that, and it's not just SharePoint. Maybe it's a SharePoint permissions issue, maybe they're locked out of Active Directory, maybe something else is going wrong, and that's kind of where it seems to get a little bit cumbersome for most organizations and can be pretty difficult. We've worked with some organizations to implement SharePoint help desks, and it really is very much a coordination of the SQL guy, the AD guys, the desktop support guys, as well as those SharePoint experts, and kind of training all of them to understand what the platform does and how they can help users.
Wonderful, thank you, Michael. Reuven?
The help desk sometimes gets short shrift, and sometimes they don't get thought about enough ahead of time, and they don't get the training they need. So something really new, something big is coming in, and the help desk sometimes can be the shoemaker's children, the last to know or to be trained up on that. It can be a problem. So you need to do that. One of the things that Michael talked about building internally, I know that a very large organization based here in Toronto created a new level of support called level 0 support. So level 1 support's the help desk, but for SharePoint they created level 0 support. And when someone asked a question or needed support, they would just automatically reroute it to the person who was the site admin for that site. But those site admin people had not been properly prepared either. So you have to be careful with your strategy and make sure that you take into account the level of training support that's required for these people so that they can provide good support, because if they're futzing around and don't know the answer, it just can kill productivity and kill the adoption, really, of your solution, because people say, well, I called support, they didn't know either, so forget it.
Great. Sue?
Well, basically what they said. Plus, you know, the one way to help actually one of the most effective strategies that an organization I worked with did to help their prepare their help desk was, number one, of course, they got them training in advance. But the other thing that happened is in the first week or two of the launch, they had the development team taking the majority of the phone calls. And the help desk people kind of sat there and observed and had an opportunity to kind of listen to the various questions that were coming in and listen to the answers that the people in the know were giving and use that as an opportunity actually to create their knowledge base, whatever wasn't already documented. And the other thing they did after the initial launch was to make sure that the help desk knew who they could call for what types of problems, so that there was never really an issue for the caller. And to tell you the truth, so one of the most effective techniques was giving them instant messaging, so that they could quickly IM the person who they knew was the right answer and keep the person on the call and still give them the answer.
I have one other thing. This is Ruben.
Go ahead.
I'm working with an organization to actually build out a fairly sophisticated help solution that includes the ability to search for people who are skillful in specific areas and specific functions, and where the people within large groups, sort of it's broken down into a number of groups across the organization, and these people have a private area where they can educate each other and educate themselves, and if they can't answer a question, can quickly ping someone else, as well as a public version of this, so that the general public can narrow down and find the right person to IM or email or post a question to be able to support a complex rollout across a large organization.
Yeah, I love, this is Michael, I love the idea of the level 0 support, and I think you know, as part of your governance plan, when you roll out a site, what we typically have right on the homepage on that top right is, you know, you have the site sponsor, the site admin, and maybe, you know, 1 or 2 people that can answer those questions as well, you know, the level 0 person. We find that typically works really well, because, you know, if users do have a question, they can go back to the homepage of their particular site or their solution, and actually know who to contact. And if you've got Link as well, or, you know, unified communications, like Susan said, they can basically just fire off a message to them and get those questions answered when they need.
And no, just like you guys said, that having the help desk be armed with the understanding of what they're trying to accomplish is a huge thing. Having them be just a moment is notice away, because, and I'm sure all of you have experienced this before with your users as well, that when they don't find the answer, they look for an alternative way around SharePoint, right? Hey, what did I used to do before? Let me go to the file share to find this document. Let me go to this old intranet that's still hanging around to get my information. Of course, we don't want that. So having the help desk be just a moment's notice away, and having the help desk itself be extremely competent and armed with the knowledge they need to make the user successful is definitely the key. Awesome ideas, guys. Let me go ahead and flip to the next one over here. This one is a really awesome question. Actually, it came from one of our viewers over here. Let me see if we can see it now. Here we go. Examples of how the value of SharePoint implementations are measured. If you can give some examples from your own perspective of how can you really see? If it's not the page hits, what is it? How do we measure it? Susan, do you want to go first?
I'm happy to go first, but you also asked me to be brief. And this is a topic that could go on for hours.
I'll time you 2 minutes.
Right. So here's what I would basically say, that there are kind of 2 ways that two metrics approaches actually that people typically use. One is quantitative measures, and those are the things that are usually relatively easy to collect. And while I don't like hits on the home page, especially when you force it to be the home page for the browser as a metric, you can look at usage statistics for pages to know which pages seem to be getting more interest. Is it the only metric? No, but I mean, it gives you some useful information. The other type of metric that I think is really important is qualitative metrics. And one good example of a qualitative metric, one that I like because it adds some color commentary to things that you can count, are stories. So collecting examples of where leveraging the solution that you built, SharePoint or otherwise for that matter, but typically squishy kind of solutions that don't have easy metrics, where you can collect stories from people who can describe how they use the solution to solve a business problem for them, and where they can measure what the value of that was to them in terms of projects that got stopped earlier because they knew they were not going to go very far, or effort saved because we could go down a path that we knew would be successful instead of trying to experiment or reinvent the wheel on our own. I've spent a lot of time focused on this topic. I've written a white paper on it, and rather than trying to read you that entire paper, it's on the homepage of my website, susanhandley.com. Sorry for the shameless plug, but I think, again, this is really, really a big topic, and less, sort of adoption might be a variation of it, but we could do a whole webinar on just this one.
Thanks, Susan. Michael?
Sure. I mean, I do. I had the exact same view as Susan. So we do a lot of work with search in particular, and one thing that we find is that we get a lot of kind of CEOs and CIOs looking at these kind of broad level studies that say that people are 25% more effective using SharePoint, and then they want us to kind of see if we can provide a solution that makes users 10% more effective, or they can collaborate easier. That's really, really hard to measure. So I'll give you an example what we do from a search perspective. Typically, we'll engage those end users and we'll try to find 10 or 15 use cases in terms of how they're using search to find something. So the reason that I knew the answer to your question earlier, Asif, is that most people, when we ask them, what are you using search for, it's, well, to find the lunch menu, right? Now, some other things that we typically find is, some typical use cases are finding the phone number or department of any first user, finding all the policies and procedures that have been recently approved. Or the big one from a search perspective is help me to find the latest 10 documents that I've modified over the last week. Now, because those are specific, we can actually measure those things, right? So we can say to them, well, currently, if a user's looking for a latest policy, for example, it might take them 3 minutes, and it's pretty simple to measure that. You send out an email to 100 users, 200 users. You say to them, start a stopwatch and see how long it's actually going to take you to find this piece of content. When you find it, press stop, right? And then we get that. We do some calculations by how much we pay them, how many users there are, to get a quantitative metric. When we implement SharePoint, we can go through that process again, right? Same use case, maybe different users, maybe the same users, and gain some sort of quantitative metric that way. I think the thing is, you have to really define what that value is, right? What value is within your organization before you can measure it. And if you start chasing things like, we want to measure the value of increased employee engagement, better communication, all of those sorts of things, it's really, really difficult. But if you look at it at a more macro level, it can be really easy. Another thing that we frequently measure is the amount of time it takes for a document to go through a review cycle. So we're working with a company currently where they'll have a document, 200-300 pages. It has to go through, between 8 and 12 people for review. Before, they used to get that document, they used to email it around, they used to get 12 copies back, and it was some poor person's job to try to Frankenstein these 12 copies back together to one cohesive document. Now what they do, they get it, they send them a link, they're on SharePoint 2010, they're using Office 2010, they can co-author that those documents as well. There's huge savings that are there, but there are also quantitative savings as well, things that we can measure.
Thanks, Michael. Ruben?
Yeah, to add to what Sue and Michael said, it can be very difficult to put metrics in to measure some of these things. So sometimes what you can do though is you can measure very specific things that by themselves might provide enough value to say that the whole project is of value, even though you're getting all this other stuff too. So I'll give you an example. And the person who's the expert in this in my mind is Sarah Haase. And she writes about that in the book that Michael and I and Sarah wrote. She looks at process. Process is the place where you can really measure stuff. And Michael touched on this. If you have a process that requires a certain number of people to do a certain amount of work every single day or every single week, if you can find something that has a fair bit of effort, that has a high pace, in other words, it's repeated often, then you can look at, say, okay, if we can shave 20 or 30 or 40% off the time that it takes to follow that process, those savings alone can potentially pay for the rest of the project. So it's a little bit like that joke of the drunk guy looking for his car keys under the light, and they say, where did you drop them? He said, somewhere over there. They said, well, why are you looking here? He said, because the light's better over here. You've got to look where the light is a little bit. So, yeah.
Excellent analogy. I've heard that one before too. Awesome. All right, so like we said before, our plan has been to jump into the questions that are coming in. So that's what I did for this one. And the next one also is an awesome one that's come in here. Let me go ahead and move to that one. Hang on a second here. All right. Someone, actually this is a few people who made this comment, and I generalized it within a question, that we don't have a local environment. We have a truly global environment. And I can definitely think of quite a few of our own customers that have this issue right now, where they want to communicate the ideas, the adoption, and just the value of SharePoint and how to best effectively use it worldwide. How do they do that? Of course, lunch and learn is not an option. The buy-in from C-level executives, of course, that is going to be there. It's going to be electronic. But what other ideas, what other strategies work in a truly global organization in your perspectives, guys? Reuven, I believe you were last time. Did you want to go first this time? Yep.
Sure. I think that one of the things in helping to decide this is, again, executive engagement to say, how strategic is what we're doing? How much are we going to invest? Is it worth actually sending someone on site to multiple locations to conduct a real lunch and learn? Because this is really, really important. But failing that, there's a few things you can do. You can do a virtual lunch and learn where you order their pizza for them and their lunch and conduct, via a meeting like this, a shared webinar. It's very difficult these days to get really good engagement when you can't see people's faces. They're checking their email, they're tweeting. There's all sorts of stuff going on. So you really get a huge drop-off in engagement when people can't see each other. But still, it has value, and engaging people, you can't skip it because it's hard. You need to find ways around it. So whether it's via a method like this, whether it's creating a video potentially, something that you do a lot of, Asif, and then sharing that so that people can watch it is another potential way to go.
Yeah, just to throw something in there before I move on to Sue on this one. Visual, of course, is huge in every perspective. So something that I have completely believed in for many years, you got to show it. You got to show what they can do. You got to take small things here and there that they're struggling with, the people are struggling with. Let them visualize the value of it. And once they see it, automatically they'll become believers. So I just want to throw that in there. Sue?
So I was going to say, in a global organization, strategies like having local evangelists become that much more important because, again, getting closer to people is sort of the concept that Reuven is saying. So at Best Buy, their local evangelists are called ninjas. At Biogen IDEX, they call them Pumas, power users of Microsoft applications. And they have SharePoint Pumas and Outlook Pumas, and they strategically place these people. They ask for volunteers and try to look for people in every single geography and in every single business unit and in every single floor, because even if you're in the same building, sometimes people just don't get their passport stamped to walk up and down a floor. So even that can be really important and a really, really effective strategy because these evangelists kind of live they live locally, and so they're there physically in person. One of my global clients did a really effective sort of virtual lunch and learn strategy that they called Get Sharp on SharePoint. And they did 30 minutes every single Thursday at the same time every single day, or every single Thursday, and for every session they spent about 15 minutes talking about a particular concept, really more about education to encourage engagement, and then the second 15 minutes was kind of bring your own problem, and we'll talk about it as a group, and we'll share what you are doing so that we can teach each other about what new and nifty kind of things we can do with SharePoint. Every single session was recorded, so if you couldn't participate on that particular week, you could always catch up with it later on. So I think both of those techniques are really good in large global organizations.
Thank you, Sue. Awesome points. Michael?
Sure. So if we take, if you're a truly global organization, if we take the lunch and learn thing out of it, there's a couple of things that we've found that really resonate with people. The first thing is having a day in the life of presentation. And this is we usually do this in a kind of cartoon format. And it's essentially, this is how you do things now, and this is how things are going to be easier when you implement your solution on SharePoint. It can be a PowerPoint deck. We frequently do them in really short two-minute intervals, targeting a piece of functionality. It's something that can be put on the homepage of an intranet or can be sent around as well. Can be really effective. Things like competitions work for some organizations. They don't work for others. So, intranet naming competitions, all of those sorts of things can work. Videos, particularly for rollout, is something that's really effective. I mean, I've seen some great, I can send through the link, but there's a great web page which actually has a whole bunch of intranet rollout videos, and some of these intranets are huge. I think some of the clients are, Pfizer and really large organizations. Some of those intranet rollout videos not only explain things like why there's a new intranet, but how to do common things like search or look for news items as well. In the end, I read this article in the Harvard Business Review a while ago where they just said you just have to keep pushing that same message over and over, because people are just constantly bombarded that if you do, one news story a week about this, about implementing SharePoint, or one news story a month, it's not going to get in people's heads. And what we find is that you just want to constantly have a stream of information as soon as you start that SharePoint project, and if it's strategic, and if it's going to impact, a large amount of people within the organization, to actually have constant communication around why we're doing this, what users can expect, where can they find help, so they're not shocked, right? They know exactly what's coming, they know exactly what to expect, they know how their lives are going to change, and you find that adoption curve much easier.
One more thing I'm going to throw in there as well. One of our current customers, in fact, she's online here as well in the webinar. I won't call you out, but they have a global organization, and they have a pretty nice large organization, and what they've done is they've made a SharePoint user group within the company, and it's a completely virtual user group. I was also invited once to speak to the user group and talk about a few things, and I saw the dynamic as being just like the dynamic that we see in SharePoint user groups that we see across the countries, whether if we present, I'm sure all of you guys, and I've also presented virtually and in person, and the same kind of dynamic exists within a company. So now you're speaking and talking about the issues of the company, or the best practices for the company instead of things in general. And that works really nicely, at least from what I saw. So that's another thought that I thought I would throw out there. All right, here's the next one, guys. You should see it pretty soon. Here we go. How do you get top management interested in SharePoint? If you are not in the top management, let's say the people who I'm sure some of, or hopefully many of actually people who are attending right now are, but if you're not, what do you do? How do you get their attention? How do you really make them understand the value of what this platform, SharePoint, can do? How do you help them visualize it in the first place? Susan?
I'm going to give you the snarky answer. Top management isn't interested in SharePoint. They're interested in the kind of solutions that SharePoint can enable. And if you want to get top management's attention, you want to understand what are the top things that you're focused on, what's keeping you up at night, and what are our major organizational objectives for the year or in general. And then what you're really trying to show them is how can SharePoint address some of those key pain points. And in fact, so I don't care if an executive isn't really interested in SharePoint, because that isn't what I'm trying to get them engaged around. What I want them to care about are the solutions we can create using SharePoint as the tool. Not sure if that's what the answer you wanted, but yeah, that's what I'll stop.
No, I agree. Definitely. I'll definitely back you up on that. It's not really the tool that anybody's interested in. It's actually the value that it provides. That's what you got to show.
Right, what you can do with. So
absolutely.
Focus on what you can do. Again, you want to talk around solutions. I often use what Michael had talked about, day in the life stories. Focus on what life is going to be like and the opportunities we can create by leveraging this tool, not that it happens to be called SharePoint.
Absolutely. Reuven?
Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you just can't. Sometimes there's been previous failures of intranet or collaboration solutions. No one really wants to get their name on it until they see if it's going to succeed. So I'm not going to answer the question of how, but rather how do you get around it? And we speak and we write and we talk about. You'll see all over the internet things that talk about steering committees and champions and engagement being essential from the top, and it is, but sometimes you just can't get it. And so what you need to do then is build it from the bottom up. You need to show and involve and convince enough people from the bottom up that you're going to make their lives better with this solution. And from them, you choose the most interested or the most capable to form an operational type committee as opposed to a steering committee that makes sure that things happen appropriately, that governance is written and enforced appropriately, and that really kind of steps in as a surrogate for the top management that you can only knock on that door so often. If you don't get a response, you need to find a way to make it happen without them. Then once things start to become successful, you'll find all sorts of engagement. People want to own it, but you need to figure out how to drive it without them sometimes.
Great, thank you, Reuven. Michael?
Yeah, I think I'm going to contradict Reuven. I think it's actually quite difficult to get SharePoint rolled out successfully or a solution on SharePoint if the top management really isn't interested. I mean, I think they really need to drive that process. One of the things, I mean, I see that most organizations now are interested in SharePoint, especially the top management, simply because Microsoft, has really done a brilliant marketing job around SharePoint. I think what management are interested in kind of the possibilities that SharePoint as a platform can offer. I think what you need to get them interested in is all the other things that they have to consider as well. And it's things like governance, it's things like training, it's things like change management. This is not a piece of software where you just go and install and all of these magical business benefits start to occur. I think you really have to get your SharePoint, your management team, to understand that this is going to be a fundamental way in how your organization can work and collaborate together, and it really requires quite a bit of thought around those particular areas. SharePoint's not a difficult platform to sell, right? I think the best job in the world at the moment is being a SharePoint salesperson. It'll be awesome. I mean, you can go and speak to management. They can ask you pretty much any single feature. Does it do document management? You can go yes. Does it do change management? Yes. They can tick off all these sorts of boxes, and you're guaranteed to make your sale. I think what we need to do is really get management interested in how much of an impact this platform can have within their organization, and also all of the other things that go along with that. And I think it's one of the reasons why, you know, things like governance and information architecture, adoption and training are just such hot topics in the SharePoint community at the moment.
Very true. You know, just to sum up what you guys are also saying, it is very true that the management needs to understand the value. They need to see, you know, how much dollars and cents is going to save my organization. Why should we move from, pardon me, mentioning specific products, but like Documentum or Cognos for dashboarding stuff like that. Why should we move from there if we're already currently using it? Why should we go to SharePoint for our BI needs, for knowledge management, for personalization and stuff like that? And once and if they understand the true value of it in dollars and cents, it's an automatic easy sale. However, I got to put this out there as well, and this is kind of related to what this question is, but I do want to throw it out there. I've seen many, unfortunately, not appropriate implementations, meaning implementations which were there was like almost like a turnkey. All right, here we go, here's SharePoint, and then the top management who saw these bells and whistles beforehand, they say, what is this thing? This is not what we bought. And so please be cognizant of those things and get true SharePoint experts involved, at least in the beginning, to strategize as to what you're going to be using it for. Management needs to understand exactly how it's going to benefit the organization, not just the bells and whistles, but of course, how is it going to affect our organization positively, and they need to see that afterwards. So strategizing is very, very important, not just turnkey, put it on there, because then you will never have the buy-in of top management ever again afterwards, unfortunately, if that happens. All right, here's another question from one of our attendees here. It'll be coming on in just a second. Here we go. Okay, so do social features, which are pretty amazing these days within SharePoint, help with SharePoint adoption? We've seen social features creep up more and more throughout the versions in SharePoint, and do they really drive adoption? You know, just like the adoption outside of other entities like Facebook and Twitter and stuff in the world have started people collaborating and being engaged more with each other. Is this one of those things that we can utilize to the advantage? I'm not sure who was first last time, so anybody want to raise their hand virtually and go first? Anybody? Michael, Reuven, Sue?
I'll go first then.
I knew that was going to happen to people. Go for it, Michael.
Damn it. I should have spoke up earlier. Social features in SharePoint help with adoption. I'm going to be kind of controversial. I'm gonna steal Susan's mantle and be controversial. To be honest with you, we're finding that, you know, I think a lot of organizations are still having trouble almost selling those social features into their enterprise. So in that respect, you know, you can almost argue that they actually can hinder people adopting the platform. Now, I'm a huge believer in the possibilities that the social tools provide, providing that you've actually made a correct use case and you have context of how those social tools are going to be used within your organization. So I'll give you an example of kind of two different ways. One of the ways is just like Asif has mentioned, is basically saying, you know, here's these social capabilities within SharePoint. You can do all of this cool stuff. Let's go at it and see what kind of happens. That typically fails, right? Without actually understanding why those social features are going to provide value, just putting them out there typically fails, because there's still the conception out there that people view those social tools as a waste of time. And what a lot of organizations think is that, well, we put out these social tools within SharePoint, and all people are going to be using is kind of you know, wasting time, because it's frequently marketed as kind of Facebook for the enterprise. I've also seen the complete opposite way, where an organization actually looked at specific business use cases and said, how can we adopt these social capabilities to actually provide value? One great example, right? Big engineering organization, right? they wanted to basically allow people to ask questions in an easy format and allow juniors to basically have access to experts in a much more efficient way. Now, if you're a junior engineer, right, and you're out in the middle of somewhere and you're doing some kind of mining work and you have a question, it's very unlikely that you're going to send a staff or email attached with a photo saying, has anyone seen this particular rock sample? Can anyone get back to me? There's no way someone's going to send a staff or email to everyone. So what they did, they established this idea of using those social features, and they marketed it as technical chat, where anyone can ask a technical question, regardless of where they are, and then get help from experts or from other individuals. It was huge, right? It went really, really well, because all of a sudden they didn't see those social features, as this kind of Facebook-esque waste of time. They actually saw it providing significant business value, because you had a whole bunch of people contributing to ideas. And we had some really awesome stories about, guys being out in the middle of South America, looking at a particular rock sample, not really knowing what it was, getting their iPhone or their Windows phone, taking a photo of it, putting it up there through their newsfeed, and getting people to actually comment on it, and getting experts to say, well, actually, we saw this in this particular area. They kind of debated around it, and they got an answer back really, really quickly. Social features can help with SharePoint, but I think at the moment a lot of organizations view them with quite a lot of trepidation and fear. You really have to see how those social features can be applied to your organization and specific business scenarios. If it does take off, like in Yammer's example, it can really be hugely popular.
Great points. Thank you, Michael. Ruben, you were going to start up saying something?
Yeah. So I wasn't 100% sold on social in the enterprise myself before I started working about 4 months ago at a medium-sized organization. So I work at Avanade. That's a global organization, more than 20 countries, more than 17,000 people around the world. And I have been incredibly impressed with social in the enterprise. We use NewsGator on top of SharePoint, and the amount of sharing and helping now, it takes a lot of work. We have evangelists, and we have lots of training, and there's other things, and it's not just specific use cases like Michael talked about. We have sort of more fun discussions as well. But from a business driver point of view, I've seen tremendous value. I've answered questions for people in Germany. People in Australia have helped me with issues, and it's been tremendously powerful. So I'm really impressed with it. But to get to this specific question, do social features in SharePoint drive SharePoint adoption? I would almost say the social features can drive social adoption, but it's the fact that it runs on SharePoint doesn't really mean that aside from those social features, it's really driving SharePoint adoption, because we all know that SharePoint is this giant, many-headed beast that is doing so many different things. So just the fact that you have really great uptake with your social doesn't necessarily mean that you've got great adoption with your communications aspect on your homepage or something like that. So just a little bit careful around what this really means. You can have great social adoption, but yet some of the other stuff that you wanted SharePoint to be used for may not be adopted as well.
You just stole exactly what I was going to say. Social might help adopt social, but I do want to say, Ruben, there is a reason that you're seeing social working at Avanade, and I think it really ties to what Michael said, and that is that there is a use case that is fundamental to the nature of the kind of work that you do, which is that you solve very, very similar problems for clients all over the world, and the people who have a particular piece of knowledge about something don't necessarily have to be on the same engagement that you are. But you know that among those 17,000 people, someone has solved that problem before. And so there is a very, very meaningful and relevant use case, because the need to solve a client problem quickly is both beneficial to the client and to Avanade. So there's an enormous use case for having this quick ability to get answers from experts all across a globally diverse consulting firm. So I think the reason that you're seeing that uptake is because of exactly what Michael said, is that there's a very compelling business case that would have been very difficult to make work if email was the way that we were communicating, because everyone ignores those, organization all emails because they're not targeted, but you can target in social. So again, if the use case for social works in your business, then that's what you promote, that's what you educate, that's what you teach people about, and you're far less likely to have a failure. Now, is it going to help with SharePoint adoption? No, but it'll help solve a business problem using social.
Good point.
Something I'll throw in there as well. Social, of course, when it all started, Facebook, Twitter, and everything else came on the arena, many people actually, especially people who have been in IT for a while, thought that, this is just a fad. It's not really going to last. Who's going to collaborate and share their updates and all? And of course, it took off big time. Now, I'm not saying most people. I'm saying many people did not really believe in it to begin with. And I'm seeing the same exact thing happen more and more within the enterprise right now. Many people say, well, it's not really going to work with in-house. Our communication is not going to take it to the next level. It's just not going to work. And I'm seeing a lot of believers being converted once they see the power of what you can do with constant communication, collaboration, and just aggregation of all this data that you can search later when you really have a need that's going to be accomplished within in-house and not some outside social platform. So I agree with all of you guys. This definitely.
I have to say, Steve, I've seen a major sea change from as short a time ago as 18 months ago, when I'd say more than the majority of clients would say things like "turn off my sites."
Right.
The majority wanted nothing to do with it. Now we flipped that, and the majority at least want to explore, at least want to ask a question, at least want to try a pilot or try something out, and many are well beyond that, actively engaged in, we need this now. So there's been a major shift, I'd say, in the last 2 years or less.
Yeah, I gotta agree. Just to kind of chat a little bit about that, there's two resources that I really like around the whole collaborative social thing. McKinsey, who's a really well-known consulting company, just released a report. I think it's called Unlocking the Value of the Social Economy. It's about 150 pages. Their kind of findings pointed to being able to get 20 to 25% more effective. I think it was collaboration or making employees a little bit more effective. But it had some really good, some really good data, and it's a really good read about some of those social tools. It's also a great thing to put in front of executives, because McKinsey is, probably the most well-respected consulting company out there. The other book as well, if you're interested, is from Jacob Morgan. It's called The Collaborative Organization. I think awesome read. It's about $20. I think you can get it on your Kindle. All of Jacob Morgan's stuff is actually really good, and he talks about what he calls emergent collaboration technologies and how they could be applied to the enterprise. But it also speaks a lot into how SharePoint can be applied as well. And I'm the same as Ruben. I mean, even like 6 months ago to a year ago, it was, we don't want to have anything to do with this. People are just going to be wasting time. And I think one of the keys is how you pitch it to your organization. If you go in and say, these social tools, think of it like Facebook. As soon as you say think of it like Facebook, it's pretty much dead in the water, right? So what I typically do is say think of it like LinkedIn. Right, a way that you can communicate and mine expertise from people, or something that's more specific to your business scenario. For God's sake, if you use the Facebook analogy whenever you're talking about these tools, you're pretty much dead in the water.
That's a really good point.
I just throw in two more cents, and that is, I think that one of the things I just want to throw out a caution. I see the exact same thing that you guys do, where people are much more interested in it. And I think one of the things that's going to happen is that we're still trying to shake out how to communicate to people. What's the right vehicle to have which types of conversations? So just one word of caution is when we start introducing all these really cool social features, which are now sort of front and center in SharePoint 2013, what we've actually done is increase the number of ways that we can have conversations. And it's going to be really important to start helping people, just remind them about, some conversations should still take place face-to-face. Some conversations might still be better in email because, for example, the SharePoint news feed has I think it's a 512 character limit, not 140 characters like Twitter, but it still is meant for short conversations. And then you also have a discussion, which is another place to have a conversation. And unless we're taking away email, we can still use email. We still have instant messaging. We still have the phone, and we still have talking to someone in person. And I think one of the things we're going to want to think about is sort of helping people figure out what's the right place for what types of conversations.
Excellent points, guys. Let me go ahead and move to the next slide over here. So we are set to end on time, which is going to be about 19 minutes from right now. It was an hour and a half webinar. There's a lot of good content. Still good questions are coming in, so we'll keep that time. Let me go ahead and go to the next one here. You should see it on the screen pretty soon. Here we go. So what specific training resources could we use to develop in-house experts? That's something that comes to us as our company all the time as well, as to what can we do. We can't really depend on you guys all the time. We have to have some expertise in-house, and we got to grow that expertise, whether it be through documentation, videos, or whatever else. And I'll let you, I don't want to steal away your thunder, guys, so I'll go ahead and let you say things first before I'll put my own 2 cents in there. So, Reuven, would you like to go first?
This is the one question that you should take first. Come on.
I should take first? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
This is your thing.
I've always believed since the beginning that consultants are pretty expensive. Okay? I'm going to make this bold statement, and it's true. Everybody agrees with that. Consultants are expensive, and if you're going to have consultants on call all the time to solve all your problems with SharePoint, it's going to cost you a lot of money. In-house expertise is needed, extremely, extremely needed, and we figured this out many years ago. Back in 2005 or so, when we said, you know what, we need to provide in-house, build up in-house expertise. And at that time, we started making video tutorials on SharePointVideos.com. Right, 2005 is the first time that we started doing it. And since then, we've, of course, grown quite a bit in that arena, and we've gotten some awesome feedback through the years. I'm not trying to pitch, of course, our own product, but just video tutorials speak thousands of words at a time. Just, if the saying that an image is worth 1,000 words is true, and of course it is true, then imagine what video can do for your users, for everybody in the organization, everybody from top management to helping them realize what it can do, the accomplishment, the proposition that this platform provides, all the way to the end user sitting in a cubicle, have a specific task to do, and now they can do it much easier. And they just need to visualize it first before they jump into investing more time understanding it, learning it, implementing it. So I'm an extreme believer personally, and I've seen it, in fact, that video tutorials are huge in all aspects of it. So that's my contribution to that. Of course, there's other stuff as well, but I don't want to jump in too forward with that. Who would like to go next? Reuven, you want to throw something in there?
So this is Reuven.
Yeah, go for it.
This generally, I think, is a bit of a pyramid scheme in the sense that the specific training, what resources could you develop in-house experts, is that you run these train the trainer type scenarios where you have your key training team, and they identify those people. Sue mentioned that some companies, they call them pumas or ninjas. You find those people and you train them. I think the trick is not to overtrain. I think that it's a real waste of time teaching general business users, department heads or department owners or other types of people. It's a real waste of time to teach them about content types and metadata. They are never going to apply it. The majority of them are never going to apply it in real life scenarios because they've got day jobs. They're not information architects. They don't do it every day. And so they'll revert to what they know, which is folders, subfolders, or sometimes they'll create some crazy mixed up metadata scheme just trying to figure it out on their own. So I think you follow this pyramid scheme of training down to the right level, and then at some point someone needs to be the consultant, whether that's someone who's it's a little bit of a side job for them. They're allowed up to 10 or 20% of their time for assisting this, especially during early phases. And they then either train or actually not train, but assist the business user in developing a solution that's for them. And then I agree that that video is a really great sustainment tool. I think that when you've seen something or been trained on something but haven't used it in a while, if there's a video you can access to remind yourself of it or to deepen your understanding, that is a really, really powerful, efficient way to develop those skills.
Thanks, Ruben. Michael?
Yeah, I completely agree, and this is going to sound strange coming from someone who runs a consulting company, but I do actually agree that getting consultants to train you can be really expensive. And we don't do training. We don't do end user training at Dynamic Hour. We do a lot of training strategy work, and one of the things that we do is exactly what Ruben said, that pyramid scheme of kind of train the trainer. If you're looking at actual resources to kind of develop, in-house experts, the SharePoint community is a huge wealth of information. There's a whole range of other kind of training providers out there as well. There's a lot of information kind of there. I think with SharePoint, it's the type of thing that sitting down and having training on the platform for a couple of weeks or a month is great to get the basics. But the only way that you learn how to use the platform and some of its quirks is to really, dedicate time to actually being in there and actually using it. Okay, and using it in the context of your own organization. We find, when we work with larger organizations, that the best trainers are actually the people that are there using SharePoint the most often, and they almost become SharePoint trainers without even kind of knowing it, and they become SharePoint experts just by the way that they kind of do their work. There's training material for them, so they can look at those other aspects as well. And just touching on Ruben's point as well, he's absolutely right. Right, you don't need to train end users in SharePoint. You need to train them in the features that they need to solve their specific business problems. So I'll touch on search. I'll touch on search again. So when we do a search rollout, we typically train our end users in how to use search. But depending on the organization, we'll train them in different aspects, right? For most users, they do need search training, but it's really along the lines of, this is the search box. You type in a query, you press enter. On the left-hand side, there's some refinement panels which help you refine those search results. That's pretty much it for most organizations. If it's an organization, something like an engineering organization or something that's technically focused, we might also train them in how to use the query syntax, right? So being able to use ands or ors or nots in how to construct more complex search queries, simply because they're kind of technically based people. But we would never do that in something like a government organization, right? Because people just wouldn't use that. So tailor the training specific to your organization, and for those in-house experts, there's tons of books out there. The SharePoint community is really, really good at kind of answering questions. There's a lot of websites out there which have a whole range of free materials for you to use as well.
Thanks, Michael. I believe everybody has gone on this question, right?
No, actually, I was going to just add one
go for it,
side comment to the question. So I think one of the best ways to develop expertise in anything really, is to get lots of problems to solve. And that's why, for example, as consultants, we all get to know more than our clients do, because we get the opportunity to solve these problems and to get asked by our clients, essentially, to figure out how to solve new and different problems with SharePoint. So it's exposure to lots and lots of different problems that helps consultants develop their expertise. So at one of my favorite clients, one of the things that they do is that they have a cadre of, let's call them superpower users that are effectively coaches. And when you get a new site and you're new to SharePoint, you get assigned a coach. And the coach is really acting like your mentor to help make sure that you're using SharePoint effectively, that you're applying the right security, that you're designing a security plan that's going to meet the business needs, and that you're using the right template, choosing the right features and functions to solve the particular business problem that you have. And the benefit, of course, to the person who's getting the coach is they get this person who's there and available to them on an ongoing basis who knows the problem they're trying to solve. The benefit to the coach, however, is they get more than one essential client or mentee, if you will. And they get to learn because in learning what business unit A wants to do, they can make a correlation to what they just helped B try to do, and then they can in turn take both of those areas to C. So they essentially develop a model for learning based on having a real problem to solve, which means they're going to retain it, they're going to find the right answer, they're going to use the SharePoint community to help them solve the answer if they don't know how to solve the problem themselves. But essentially, these in-house experts are going to become more expert, if you will, by getting more opportunities the same way consultants do, by solving more problems.
Absolutely. I think it goes both ways. You're right. The learning happens with the mentor and the mentee. It has to be this way to move successfully forward together. We got a couple of other ones. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next one here. So here's the next one. Will be coming your way in just a moment. It's a long one, so I'm going to go ahead and read this off here. What if you had this thing called SharePoint within your organization for years and it has not made much of an impact, much of headway within your organization? Now, how do you move forward and change the minds of people in the organization who have seen it, not seen it work, didn't like it, and it's been years, especially the late adopters also. This is a combination of a few questions that came in. I put it together. So what are your thoughts on that, guys? Michael, you want to go first?
Sure. So the first thing is, and this is what people don't do, go out and ask your organization why it hasn't made headway, right? And then address those features. I know that sounds really simple, but it's, I see it all the time. People are wandering around, saying, well, I don't know why no one's using it. They kind of pontificate and they make up philosophies and all these sort of models. Just go and ask your end users, right? Why haven't you been, if you've had this thing called SharePoint, tell me why it hasn't been used. And typically, I think it's for a number of kind of common reasons. So the first one is from the whole change management adoption perspective like we've been talking about. Maybe SharePoint started off with a bang, people did use it, but they didn't get over that adoption hurdle and went back to using other tools, which is problematic but fairly typical. More commonly, what I find is that the problem is that people roll out this thing called SharePoint, right? And if you ask 10 different people what this thing called SharePoint is, they give you 10 different answers. And that's a huge lack of alignment, which can cause real issues, because the problem is that you don't want to roll out this platform. You want to roll out specific business solutions for your users, sites to make our project management easier, for example, a capability to manage our contracts a little bit easier. If you just roll out SharePoint, don't give people any idea about what they're supposed to be doing on it. The first thing people will do is jump onto a SharePoint site, look at it and say, yep, this is pretty good, it's kind of pretty funky, it's online, but they won't actually use it. If you target, like we said, specific use cases, business scenarios with correct communication and with correct training, then it can work. But I think the number one tip is go and engage the business and ask them why it hasn't worked, and then attack those items in your kind of subsequent implementations. The other thing I found worked really well is that if SharePoint, is kind of really bad, and there's some organizations where people just hate it. I mean, they hate it. We've gone in there and then said to end users, we're SharePoint consultants, and we've nearly had tomatoes kind of thrown at us. One of the things that we found was basically they just stopped and they completely rebooted their SharePoint implementation by taking it down, rebranding it, not calling it SharePoint, doing all the things that I mentioned previously, and then re-rolling it back out. And it was amazing how many end users actually said, whoa, this new document collaboration system is awesome. We'll be like, yeah, but this was the same tool that you guys used to hate. And they'll be like, no, it's not. No, it's not. That was SharePoint. This is, the hub. It's much, much better. So even that small change of perception can make a huge difference.
So true. Just change the name of it to something they can relate to makes a huge difference. Completely agree. Sue?
Well, I actually keep a collection of names, intranet names, because I think that it is really important, and sometimes you do just have to change the name. So I agree with what Michael said, with just one slight difference. You don't really want to find out why SharePoint hasn't worked. What you really should talk to people about is what their challenges are. What's keeping them up at night? What are the barriers that they have to communicating with other people? What are the challenges that they have in creating the deliverables that they need to create for their job? And take the conversation out of SharePoint and focus it around their business solution. And then you can craft a solution that meets their needs. And then again, as you were saying, it doesn't really matter whether it's on SharePoint or not. But so let's just say we're past that. And now what we've got is these great templates that meet people's needs, and they're great places for teams to collaborate. And because we still have other ways of doing things, sometimes you need to overcome a little activation energy. And one of the things that most good project teams do when they start is they talk about sort of what is our charter, what are we trying to accomplish, and how are we going to work together. And one thing I think is pretty cool and very effective is if you can get teams to incorporate into their charter, how are we going to use SharePoint to collaborate? What are the norms that we're going to follow? What are the conventions and guidelines? What are the expectations so that we can avoid Ruben's scenario of being in the meeting and having the document on the desktop instead of in the SharePoint site? What are we going to agree and hold ourselves accountable for as a team so that we can work collaboratively together? And then you really have everyone on the team kind of agreeing to make things work. And look, you only have to have a couple of very successful teams that everyone else will want to emulate to sort of get that, to use some sort of planned and structured approach to then create a viral adoption.
Excellent, Todd. Very true. All right, Ruben, you got only a couple minutes left before we end the webinar. You want to go for it?
So every time one of us starts speaking, we keep saying, I agree with the person before, and I vowed to myself I wasn't going to say that until Sue said her last sentence, and that is what I agree with. I think that instead of announcing, we're going to redo this, a company-wide thing, revamp, find a cooperative, enthusiastic group that has a problem and solve their problem, work with them, do all those things that Sue said, find a team and make their life better, and then find the next team and make their life better. And after you do one or two of these, you might find that your biggest problem is managing the load that comes at you. Someone will go to a meeting and they say, oh yeah, I've got this organized just like this. And they, well, how'd you get that? Well, the IT or whoever the team is, knowledge management, helped us with this, and now things are better. And then you've got to bar the door. So the way to start is start small, not with a big fanfare, not with a big announcement, but with successes that you can build on, and then watch what happens.
Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and close our webinar right now. This webinar, by the way, was recorded, and hopefully it's going to be online pretty soon. Everybody who was registered and other people also who did not get a chance to register, everybody's going to receive an email from me within the next couple of days showing the actual or listing the actual link to the webinar. First of all, I want to thank the presenters, the panelists over here, Sue, Ruben, Michael. Awesome stuff. Thank you for sharing your time for the benefit of the community. Hopefully the folks online got a lot out of it, and hopefully for months or maybe years to come they'll be watching this webinar and gaining more knowledge from it and making their SharePoint adoption, or SharePoint initiatives I should say, successful within an organization. And I want to thank you folks online who have stuck around with us for the hour and a half. Thank you very much for being here. Hopefully we'll return with something else in the future as well. In the meantime, happy holidays and have a great day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.